And coming up next is Lisa Bellan Boyer.
Yeah, yeah.
That glorious day, it was unbelievable. It couldn't be what the one TV channel that we were getting was saying it was. In the neighborhood that morning we struggled hard to maintain the normal, but the illusion was rapidly deteriorating. I decided I was going to walk to the Jersey City waterfront and see it for myself. It couldn't possibly be what they were saying it was. I headed down Montgomery Street, past the Jersey City Medical and Trauma Center, and all the way in the near and far distance I heard the sirens. On the horizon was this endlessly boiling column of smoke. It just kept rising and rising from the ground, and it looked like it was never going to stop. It was a column of fire and smoke. I thought about the column of fire and smoke, the pillar of fire and smoke in the desert in the Bible's book of Exodus. But that was there to guide and guard the people. This was not that. I thought about 1993. Jersey City was involved in the first World Trade Center bombing. Many of the conspirators in that plot lived in Jersey City. Famously, the Ryder truck rental agency, where one of their number returned with the deposit slip trying to collect the deposit on the truck they destroyed in the bombing, was located just a few minutes from our house. I remembered 1995, when the street I was on was packed with media trucks on the day that they arrested Ramzi Youssef in Pakistan. He lived right here. I remember at that time people in the neighborhood having conversations about terrorists lived on my block. Terrorists lived on my block. I looked at that endless column of fire and smoke, and I knew, and everybody in Jersey City knew, that it had to be Muslim extremists. And then I saw her, young woman wearing hijab, head covering, standing with that column of fire and smoke, that pillar of destruction and death right behind her. And she was having a conversation with a couple of her friends. She was animated. I can't say whether she was happy or horrified, just animated. And all of a sudden, in my heart, I was seized with rage. It was like in my heart there was a pillar of destruction and death. And I wanted to walk up to her and scream in her face, "What do you people think you're doing? If you don't like it here, get the hell out!" And then a little voice spoke in my ear, like on my shoulder, and spoke in my ear, "Don't do that. Jesus wouldn't want you to do that." And I took a breath, and I shuddered, and I kept walking down to the Jersey City waterfront, and the rest of the day I watched the harbor evacuation from Exchange Place. That night I stumbled home, put the key in my lock in my apartment door, and on the other side of the door was our cat, Fiorello. We'd been waiting all day. And that's when I broke down, because I realized there were going to be many, many homes that night with a pet waiting on the other side of the door and an empty supper dish. The next day I showed up at the Jacob Javits Center with thousands of other people, begging, "How can I help? Please let me help. I really want to help." I remember watching the ironworkers muster to go down to the zone. They looked like urban Sir Galahads to me. They had the breastplates and the helmets and the boots and the welding sabers and all the right stuff, and they were ready to go. And all I had was a prayer book and a whole lot of questions for God. 4 days later, my husband came home. Paul came home from Union Seminary, where he'd answered the call from the Red Cross for volunteer chaplains. And he said to me, "You can do this. You should do this." So I signed up. And 2 weeks later, I walked into Pier 94 Family Assistance Center and found the section of the pier designated for the chaplains, picked up a pen and signed in for my first shift. I had just put the pen down on the clipboard, and a woman from Red Cross Mental Health came running into the chaplain's office. "Russian! We really need somebody who speaks Russian right now, please!" I shrugged and said, "Well, I speak some Russian." "Good, come with me." And we went through the maze of white canvas partitions to divide up the pier into the offices and headquarters for all the different agencies that were responding. And we walked into Red Cross Mental Health. And there she was, an older woman wearing head covering, standing there with her son and a couple of his cousins. They were from Uzbekistan, a country I had traveled to back in the 1980s when I worked as a tour manager for a cultural exchange travel firm that took tours to the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. I had only been there less than 15 minutes, and there she was, this grieving mother. And there I was with my bad Russian. They'd assigned me to stay with her until sundown. She was suffering from extreme dehydration. She'd been fasting for 4 or 5 days, begging Allah to bring her young daughter out of the pile. Her young daughter had just emigrated from Uzbekistan a few months before and was living with her brother and the cousins. And she'd been working in a snack canteen in one of the upper floors of the South Tower, contracted by a corporation. The Red Cross had been flying in family members from international families as soon as they could possibly arrange to get to New York. And there she was. We sat together and waited for the sun to go down. I bumbled out a few things about how I had been to her country and knew how beautiful and how ancient it was. And we waited for the sun to go down, and when the sun went down, she took the bottle of water and drank. That night, at the end of my first shift at Pier 94, on my way home, I cried. I was so glad that I had listened to that little voice on my shoulder on the morning of September 11th and had not screamed at that young woman. And I cried, remembering sitting with this grieving mother. I'll never forget the grief and exhaustion on her face. That young daughter working in that snack canteen, that seems like a humble job maybe, but I know for her, knowing the limitations for a young woman, on the possible expectations for life in Uzbekistan, what it must have been like, how glamorous and magical and exciting it must have been to work in a snack canteen in the upper floors of the South Tower. Uzbekistan, ever since the Soviet Union dissolved, has been ruled by a dictator, and that's decades now, and he's famous for his human rights violations. His nickname is the Boiler. I honor her courage and determination for what it took to get out of there and come here. And I haven't forgotten that there were Muslims in the towers pursuing the American dream, and Muslims in my neighborhood pursuing the American dream. In the years since, I've become an ordained interfaith minister, and I teach at a community college, world religion survey courses, and many of my students are brilliant young Muslim women. And I'm so glad, so very glad that I heard that voice speaking in my ear. Thanks be to God. Alhamdulillah.